Thanks everyone for staying with us, and this is FCT Brief. Now, the hope of Senator Natasha returning to the Red Chamber after a 6-month suspension has hit a roadblock as the Senate has formally declined her request to resume legislative duties. In a letter signed by Yahaya Danzaria, acting on behalf of the clerk to the National Assembly, the Senate maintained that her suspension, which began on March 6, 2025, remains in force until the Court of Appeal rules on the case she filed challenging the decision. The Senate acknowledged Akpoti-Oduaghan's notification of her intended return on September 4, 2025, the date she claimed marked the end of her suspension. However, the Senate clarified that her suspension took effect on March 6, 2025, and emphasized that the matter is still sub judice. The Senate insists that no administrative action can be taken until the Court of Appeal delivers a verdict.
Natasha Akpoti-Oduaghan, who represents Kogi Central, was suspended in March 2025 following a Senate resolution. Her suspension stemmed from a March 6 decision of the Senate Committee on Ethics, Privileges and Public Petitions, which accused her of insubordination after she resisted a change of her designated seat during plenary. The sanctions also stripped her of 8 office privileges and salaries. She, however, maintained that the suspension was politically motivated, linking it to a petition she filed against Senate President Godswill Akpabio alleging sexual harassment. In a ruling, Justice Binta Nyako of the Federal High Court held that the provisions of Chapter 8 of the Senate Rules and Section 14(2) of the Legislative Houses Powers and Privileges Act, which permits indefinite suspension of members, were inconsistent with the Constitution. The judge ruled that while the Senate could suspend members, such action could not last beyond the legislative session. To help us dig deep into the conversation, we have a senior advocate of Nigeria, Chino Obiagu, who is live with us via Zoom from Lagos. Good morning, SAN.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and later in the conversation, during the conversation, we'll be having a lawyer, Vane Akanimo Agbon, who will be joining us right in the studio. We'll be expecting him to come on. But SCN, let me give you this first opportunity to help us comment on this issue. There are 2 sides to this. One says Senator Natasha, having served her 6 months, is bound to resume plenary. And the other group is saying, no, it is not automatic because the case is already at the Court of Appeal, and that until that is decided, she cannot resume. That is the position of the Senate. Now, what do you make of all these actions? Can she resume based on the initial fact that she has spent the 6-month suspension?
Yes, definitely. I mean, to deny Senator Natasha from resuming after the 6 months is complete unlawful. The Senate has insisted in many cases, even some cases that we find ourselves, that judicial proceeding cannot stop legislative proceeding. And they have gone ahead to consider bills, take action, suspend members, and do legislative duties, whether it's proceeding before the House or administrative, without recourse to court order, because under the principle of separation of powers, the legislature runs on its track as the judiciary. So for the Senate to say that because the matter is in court, therefore the suspension having elapsed, she cannot be recalled, is, with all due respect, the Senate shooting itself on the foot. It's like burning the house to save it, because they will no longer say that judicial proceedings can stop legislative duties if they insist on not recalling her because of a matter in court.
Well, SN, the Senate is always big on respecting the separation of power, and we'll come back to that very shortly. But every senator swears an oath of office to put Nigeria above personal interest, defend the Constitution, and act without fear or favor. Yet, the Constitution in Section 60 gives the Senate powers to make its own rules. One of those rules is Order 66 sub 8, which says a senator can be suspended until the Senate itself decides. Now, the law also in section 21 sub 2 of the Legislative House Act clearly says that suspensions can't exceed 14 sitting days. If we take a look at Justice Binta Nyako's ruling on Senator Natasha's case, she says the 6-month suspension given by the Senate is excessive, and advised the Senate to recall her, and also advising them to also consider amending section 14 sub 2 of their standing rules. Now, with this clash between the oath, the Constitution, the Senate's own rules, and the law, doesn't this, ultimately leave Senator Natasha at the mercy of her colleagues?
Definitely, you are very right. The Senate in this matter has acted unlawfully from the beginning. There are so many cases, so many, court decisions that you cannot suspend the legislature because a parliamentarian is representing a constituency. If you do that, you're denying that constituency their representation, and that's totally discriminatory because then they are not being represented while other Nigerians are being represented in the parliament. Now, that is one. Secondly, the rules itself, like my lord stated in our judgment, clearly stated that you can take disciplinary action, but within a time frame of 14 sitting days. Now, slamming a 6-month suspension, we all said that that was excessive, that was arbitrary, and that was unlawful. It is contrary to the rules of the Senate itself. Now, the Senate ignored all the cries, ignored the court decisions. After 6 months, she now wants to come back, and the Senate clerk, who is not even a senator, a Senate clerk administratively wrote a letter saying you cannot come back. That is an aberration. Because even if you are going to consider her application to return, it has to be in the floor of the Senate. It has to be her colleagues have to decide that, not an acting clerk of the Senate. I mean, this is throwing rule of law out of the window. And I think the Senate should retrace itself. I believe that my learned brother Cites in the Senate, we advise the Senate properly. Because what they're doing is setting a wrong precedent and ignoring the decisions of the court.
I'm glad, sorry, I have a follow-up to that, because I'm glad that you mentioned that it is the decision of her colleagues. Now, if you recall, on March 6th this year, following her suspension, the Senate clearly stated that she must submit a written apology before the Senate considered lifting or reducing her suspension. Why is no one talking about this clause mentioned in her suspension? Is it that are you advising Senator Natasha to disrespect the Senate again, by not, tendering an apology before she is being recalled back to the Senate?
Well, the Senate is guided by rules. And if the matter comes before the floor of the Senate, it is left for the Senate to insist, oh, you've not complied with all the conditions, for instance, the letter of apology and all that, and for her to respond. But she has to be given a floor to discuss that, not administratively throwing her application to return out. In any event, once a suspension is set with a time frame, it exhausts by a fusion of time. 6 months has elapsed, so automatically she cannot be barred from entering the Senate. Unless the Senate comes back to its plenary and extend the suspension. Otherwise, it's unlawful to bar her from resuming office. It's unlawful to prevent Kogi Central Senatorial District constituents from having representation at the Senate. It's completely unlawful. So whether there's an apology or conditions for this suspension has been made is a matter for discussion at the Senate plenary when considering her application to return to the Senate.
All right, we'll still come back to you, but we have lawyer Vane Akanimo Agbon joining us now in our studio, but we'll come back to the whole conversation right after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We still have more for you on the program. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Our conversation on the Senate's decision to, decline Senator Natasha's return to the Senate after serving her 6-month suspension. I will continue our conversation with our guest here in the studio, Vania Akanimo Agbon.
All right. At the center of it is Senator Natasha resuming at plenary. The Senate has said no because the case is in courts. despite serving the 6 months. Now, what do you make of all these?
Well, for one, the case in court is on the determination of whether or not the suspension itself it's lawful or otherwise, you know. And once suspended, you're given more or less a sanction for, in court, an offense allegedly committed, and what consequences comes with that suspension? Withdrawal of security personnel, restrictions of access to your offices, and the Senate itself, withdrawal of salaries and benefits and what have you. And it's what we call an aberration, because you've given a definite time for one to be able to serve out the consequence of your action, and that term has been completed. Now, we've had so many instances in the past where distinguished senators have actually challenged such suspensions, and they have indeed won those cases. And to challenge whether or not it's lawful, it's within her rights as a citizen of this nation, you know. At any time she can do that, regardless of it being done now. She could have very well served out her term and challenged it to say, look, I've resumed, but I want to know, is it legal or not, you know? And if the court declares that it's not legal, then she's entitled to her remunerations, her salaries and all that. Of course, the term served for her suspension can never be gotten back. That's the system. But she has a right as a citizen of this nation to seek redress in court as to whether or not the actions of her colleagues, you know, are within the ambit of the law or not. So I think very much that restraining her from resuming now, it's taking it beyond what it's supposed to be, if you ask me. We have a system. Let me give you a swift narration. Somebody is alleged to have committed an offense. He's tried, he's sentenced, and he serves out his jail term. And one day he wakes up and says, no, I didn't do this, you know, but hitherto I'll challenge the constitutionality in court, and goes to court, and the court declares that he was wrongfully convicted, yet he served his term. It happens in our judiciary, you know. So whatever is before the court today has no business with restricting distinguished Senator Natasha from resuming, having served her 6-month term.
Well, the judgment of the Federal High Court in July this year held that while the Senate has the authority to discipline its members, such sanctions must not be excessive to the point of denying the constituents their rights to representation. Now, this Senator Natasha's suspension is a classic example of depriving constituents of representation. Yeah. What other option do her constituents have at this point?
Well, like you said, it's a constitutional provision, Section 60, where the Senate has its responsibility over its affairs, yes. But Section 68 clearly describes ways in which a senator could be removed, you know, and an indefinite suspension is more or less a removal, you know, and they don't meet that criteria as laid down in Section 68, you know, and for you to say, I mean, with all due respect, there are cases that last 10 years in this country, you know, there are cases that last 15 years in this country, you know, for you to say, the case in court has to be done with, you are indefinitely suspending distinguished Senator Natasha Apoti, and it's unconstitutional.
All right.
You know.
Now, SAN, let me come to you with this. some have actually argued that a section of the Constitution actually set out that a senator can only be it has a right to participate for I think about 181 days in a legislative year. Now, if this suspension continues and the case in the court is not dispensed of, what will that mean? Does it now mean that Senator Natasha has lost her capacity to represent her constituents because she has not met the required number of days she ought to sit at the plenary?
Definitely, that's the implication. Because even this, just like my learned friend said and the CEO said, it is completely unconstitutional to remove a senator by her colleagues, because indefinite suspension actually means deny her the opportunity to sit in the proceedings, and deny her opportunity to meet the 181 days threshold that make her, qualify as a senator. Because if you do not sit within that threshold, you lose your seat. So, in other words, the whole thing is no longer legal. The whole thing is completely vindictive and political. Because if it is legal, then the law is clear that, you cannot suspend her beyond 14 proceedings, which is the court have already stated. And even if you insist that court's ruling does not bind you, then you cannot suspend her beyond the 6 months that you have imposed. And continue to deny her, saying you are waiting till a court decision is made. Well, the implication is indefinite suspension. Because even if Natasha goes to withdraw her own case in court, how about the case, the cross appeal by the Senate? So they'll leave the case there and then use that as an excuse. It is really reckless and it is really unlawful. I do hope the Senate will retract these steps.
All right, SC, and the court acknowledged that the Senate has every right to discipline its members. Now, should the Senate also debate about Senator Natasha's right, and also in line with how senators ought to comport themselves in respect to the rules? Shouldn't the debate be about that as well?
Yes, of course. The Senate has a duty to self-regulate itself. And also, in order to improve its integrity, to also encourage members to conduct themselves in accordance with their ethics and rules and privileges stipulations. But having said that, I think it's important that internal governance within the Senate must look inwards to see what is happening in the Senate. Not just respect to the conduct of senators within the chambers, but their conduct outside the chambers. And I think it's important because the Senate is the upper chambers, and its integrity is important to the integrity and image of Nigeria. So this kind of unlawfulness coming out from the upper chambers does not tell well to Nigeria's democracy. We're a country built on the Constitution and the rule of law. And I think the Senate should allow the rule of law to prevail. Whatever personal issues anybody in the Senate may have, or whatever political issues they will have with Senator Natasha should not confuse their role as custodian of the Constitution. Should not do that. And they should uphold the rule of law, because they're setting a very wrong precedent. It could be somebody else, it could be another senator tomorrow, maybe next assembly, and this case will be used as an example, as a precedent. So it is wrong to set a wrong precedent in the Senate.
Vanya, there was a case of Senator Ndume, I think in 2017, there was a case of Senator Omo Agege in 2018, where the court ruled concerning the number of days you can suspend an individual. What does it take to get the National Assembly, I mean the Senate and the House of Rep, to go by what their status book says, that it cannot be more than 14 days? What does it take to make them amend their own rules and to get back to doing things the way it should be done, as they stated it?
Well, I really don't think it's about amending their rules, because it's clear in their rules you can't suspend beyond a legislative session sitting, which in the case of the 6 months, it's clearly beyond. I believe it's about the leadership of the Senate following through with the rules of the Senate in dispensing of disciplinary actions, you know, and not taking things personal. You know, for one, like you said, today it's Natasha, distinguished Senator Natasha. But it's not about distinguished Senator Natasha. It's about a distinguished senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the Nigerian Senate. It may be any senator tomorrow, like my learned Silk has stated. It could be one of theirs tomorrow, one of the other side tomorrow. So we should let justice prevail regardless of the party involved, regardless of what personal conflicts you have with the party involved. It's, to me, not just about distinguished Senator Natasha. To me, it's about a distinguished senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the rules of the Senate. It's explicit and it should be followed through. So it boils down to the leadership of the Senate, both and that of the House of Reps, to stick to its rules and not exceed, you know, the laid down rules governing each of their members, you know. So I believe strongly that if the leadership doesn't adhere to its rules, then who does? You know, you can't treat one indecency with another. You say a senator doesn't comply with the rules of the House, then in passing your disciplinary action, you do not comply with the rules of the House. Come on. It's an irony, you know. You can't speak from two sides of your mouth. For example, on the 4th of March, 2025, a court order, an interim order was obtained. It was given by Justice Ikwacho of the Federal High Court, you know, restraining the Senate from any disciplinary action pending the determination of the case. Right. That order was disregarded. The Senate went ahead and meted out its disciplinary action. And then that same Senate today is saying, well, we are waiting for the court. Come on. Nigerians are watching.
Of course, Nigerians are watching. Well, SAN, a final one for you before we let you go. It's interesting to see how this narrative changed from a deprivation of rights based on seating arrangements to another issue of sexual harassment, which Senator Natasha is yet to prove, and also the attack on the integrity of the Senate. How do you separate these issues? And which of them really has merit? Because this is putting the public, you know, in confusion. And, you know, a lot of people are acting out based on sentiments.
Yes, well, that is true, because the Natasha's allegation against the Senate president came after the main reason for her suspension, which was her refusal to take the assigned seat. You know, so they are intertwined. And she said, okay, the Privilege Committee now said, well, if you refuse to take assigned seat, you are disobeying the Senate leadership. The issue of sexual harassment now came later, where she put the allegation. But that is a different thing altogether, because the Senate does not have the power to start investigating criminal acts or such things. So this is not the first time such allegation that deals with the integrity of the Senate is resulting in discipline of the Senate. I mean, during Omoagege's time, recall that it was an allegation that the Senate did take some action that contrary to interest of President Buhari, and he was suspended for 90 days. And the court, Federal High Court, you know, Justice Dingba ruled clearly that he could not be suspended. The Senate was wrong; he suspended him, and in any event, the Senate could not suspend him for more than 14 days, and ordered that all his privileges and their salaries and everything should be paid in arrears. And Justice Dingba today sits at the Court of Appeal. So the jurisprudence is there that even if there is a misconduct, whether it is an allegation of sexual harassment that is not proved as baseless, or whether there is a refusal to take assigned seat, which is disobedience of the Senate leadership, whatever it is, the disciplinary action of the Senate under its rules cannot exceed 14 days. And if it does, it is unlawful, and the court has said so. And that's our position, that whatever happens, Natasha can go back to court and claim all she has lost, including her salaries and allowances. But to continue to deny her seats in the Senate is deny the Kogi Central constituency their constitutional right to legal representation, to representation in the Senate.
Well, SAM, we must say thank you so much for your time with us on the program. That's where we'll have to leave the conversation this morning. We must say thank you for joining us. Also, Mr. Vania, we must say thank you also for joining us on the program. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Same here.
Thank you for being a part of our conversation. Now we'll hand you over to Lagos, where Ria Abdul and the rest of the team